Pretty entertaining, huh? But is that all Far Cry 6 can offer, or is there something more? That's the expected kind of video you guys are probably going to see, and Far Cry 6 is exactly the expected kind of game that brings those out. If you assumed it was going to be something more, then you might as well go back and try to sue the never-ending story for false advertising. In the meantime, here's a review for Far Cry 6 for the PC, PlayStation, and Xbox consoles. Subscribe to the channel if you like the videos. Speaking of expectations, graphically, the Far Cry games have always tried to shoot for the tropical feel of that pearlescent water as you look out from a cliff and see a 1957 Chevy roll by with a giant construction sled on its front and a machine gun strapped onto it like it's from the masked 1980s cartoon. In fact, you're warned in the game that the entire island is pretty much stuck in a time, not literally, but more figuratively. And traversal through Yara is going to feel instantly familiar if you played the third title. It's basically Far Cry 3 if a shit ton of people knew about it and moved there but forgot their wallets and had to make do. It's less tropical paradise and more reflection if you don't take the travel agent's advice. It's a land of poor and poorer where those who are in the top are firmly entrenched in the pyramid of money and tyranny only real-life, huge video games and movie Bond villains can actually inspire. While mostly main island or two, the main geography is spread out a great deal larger than I originally envisioned, with Danny traipsing through swamps to figure out symbolic puzzles to grab ancient artifacts, or submarining through subterranean caves investigating ghost stories and their origination, or just blowing people away in the center of a coffee plantation. While in every Far Cry game the locations are indeed characters themselves, here some changes have actually occurred on the player's side. It's first person, mostly. At times, though, the game does transition to an over-the-shoulder third-person view, mostly in camps where the cutscenes show your character fully. Does this change much? Sure, I guess. Sometimes it shows your dank ass rocking a weird-looking bulletproof suit or a medieval helmet during a cutscene, and while Ubisoft has stated this was done to give a different feel to the games and a more personalized feel, it's not like we as players didn't already imagine that we look like complete fucking goofballs already. If you've played most Ubisoft games, you've seen this view already, as the cutscenes and the base's third person is directly equivalent to Division's viewpoint, without Division's HUD masquerading as its own how much shit can one person take before they snap meter. I dug the character designs. I went with my male Danny, who careens through situations both with a seriousness that reflects the situations, as well as an offhand goofiness when things get wild. He's laid back, flip-flops, and therapy gator 1 second, and once you've stapled everything metal within 100 feet to your face and you encroach Warhammer Space Marine levels of armor, he actually has a nice solidified leadership to him later in the game. He does what's asked. He figures out what needs to be done, and when he needs help, he isn't afraid to actually ask for it, something that happens here in the game a bit more than I expected. Side characters who do help you usually look excellent. In fact, some of the cutscenes look incredibly detailed. Those skin designs are awesome. I did notice a bug, speaking of the skin designs, where the HD pack made one of the creatures that you take along with you actually look worse. It's the first downgrade HD pack that I think I've ever seen. You have some low poly enemies here and there, and some city locations that aren't the greatest with some drab textures, but as a world goes and an open world this size, not bad. Also, not completely gone, but definitely fixed, is the graphical and animation sticking that we saw in Far Cry 5. You will still see some people switching out their weapon 30 times in a discussion and someone looking very intently at nothing. Unless this game was from its start to finish consistent bugs, it would still be less than Far Cry 5. Traversal and verticality pay off greatly here because that sandbox design is so open. There's a lot of spaces in this game where you look at a spot and you figure 3, 4, maybe 5 different ways to get into it. I didn't like the performance, though, at least on a couple systems. First of all, DLSS shouldn't be a crutch, but its absence here is noticeable. AMD's system doesn't look nearly as good, and that's what you're stuck with. Performance-wise, the Xbox Series X and S actually stick to mostly 60 FPS. The original, though, is far from perfect shape, and we have been informed there's a patch, particularly for the base consoles. This is nowhere near Cyberpunk level at all, but it does drop FPS quite a bit. When it comes to the Series X and S, a little bit of stutter here and there, but I've been quite happy with both those systems. PC, bit more nuanced. First, the game has that ray tracing for shadows and reflections, but it has no DLSS, as I said, and it swaps it out for AMD's CAS and Super Fidelity systems. And while both can help definitely get you some more FPS from this game, it's just not that well optimized. I also got a question. Is it a single CPU thread issue, which happens with some Ubisoft games? No, at least not on mine. Testing on 4 different systems results in a 2080 Ti and a current i7 at 4.9, not able to get 4K 60 FPS at Ultra, which is fine because sometimes there's some future settings, but that's not it because it also was having issues at high. It's not all the time. Diving into the settings, you see fog and shadows definitely do impact the game, and honestly, ray trace shadows are not really worth it for the FPS hit. Reflections, I think, look really nice, but overall, the game definitely needs a patch. It still performs better like for like than Far Cry 5 did. With a 1080 Ti, you're looking at 1080p or 1440p and taking some hits on those different settings. The game still looks good even on the low to mid settings, but be aware, you're probably going to be diving in there. What surprises me graphically is that the consoles delivered such smooth performance, or overall smooth performance. They weren't perfect, and the PC, once dialed in, looks really good. There are times where this game is absolutely gorgeous, only let down at other times when you definitely get some low detail textures here or there, or those animation sticks that we see in a lot of Ubisoft games. One place I want to talk about, though, the excellence here is in the audio. This is incredible.
What can you tell me? Danny, want to turn some evil fucking soldados into dead ones? We're throwing together a squad for an ambush, and we want the best. Fuck them up!
So, why are you here?
I'm with Clara from Libertad. Didn't she say I was coming?
Clara, Libertad. Those are big names to throw around.
Let's go.
First, it takes a bit of finessing on the PC. The console was actually easier with its settings, but Windows is always a little bit behind the times when it comes to dialing in good sound. However, with 5.1 or Atmos DTS settings, the audio is awesome, other than, of course, the headshot, which sounds like a dude throwing a watermelon against the wall. The gun sounds themselves are great. They have a perfect envelope to them. You come over a hill, there's a dude just vigorously tapping away a death note of random spurts with his flamethrower, burning down a village, and your resistance fighters are battering him with grenades and useless bullets around his head and shoulders because he's too heavily armored, and you can actually hear them hit and ping off. Silenced weapons are still that movie-style suppressor with a dude whispering psh, psh, psh into the mic. Once the suppressor heats up and the full gun sound comes right back in, awesome audio. Explosions, missile barrages, over the head. I was surprised by the side bits as well. For example, if someone's wearing flip-flops, you can actually hear the secondary slap of the bottom of that material hitting their heels while they run. It's not perfect. There's some issues here or there with layering for sure. Probably the best Far Cry sound in any of these series. And that brings us to music. You guys know I was a huge fan of Far Cry 5. This music took a long time to grow on me. In fact, it was a couple hours before I realized I was actually digging it. It's more authentic to the jazz stylings and that mixed 1970s electric guitar and Caribbean influences than I've ever expected, and it's just usually not my jam. After a bit of time, I found myself really enjoying it. I also love the mixture of the very militant-styled propaganda music that pounds out in these specific areas that offers you this audible split between the rebels and the rulers. The best part, though, is when the game cuts away to cutscenes and it's an entirely unique feel, and finding out that this is the Narcos composer is the one who actually did those cutscenes, it makes perfect sense. Leap out of the car's still rolling, playing 1970s electric guitar, and I'm taking down people. Those are some epic moments in gaming. And speaking of epic, of course, the voices. We can't ignore the fact that a AAA actor, one of the best actors that probably has ever been in a video game, is the main antagonist. But as expected, you're not always interacting with that character, otherwise it'd be a pretty weird game. The best part here is that as the game rolls through into the middle and its later parts, you can pick up some stuff and learn things and experiences partway through the game, at the very least, that have you seen the entire situation and his son and yourself in a pretty different light. Both the male and female voice actors lending voices to Danny do a good job. As you would expect, their situations are pretty much directed usually inside the cutscene's theme and tone. There isn't a ton of variation between the two, but I like them both. I did also like parts where you're running away from battle or riding away from one, or various one-liners as you're going into battle, and the character has all these different little one-liners that he's spouting out. Also, pet all the animals, trust me. But can you trust Ubisoft to deliver a good game? So this game starts out with you and your friends partying out on a rooftop like a Nintendo commercial, only to see everyone get attacked almost instantly by this fascist regime that currently rules the location. Barely escaping with a friend, you inevitably end up running face-to-face with the game's main antagonist, who, after killing the entire crew and passenger list on a ship, does the typical bad guy thing and walks off, allowing for you to luckily escape. You know a game's serious when they shoot up a bunch of friends who are rooftop barbecuing. Well, maybe not exactly serious. You play as Danny Rojos versus the dude from Breaking Bad, a guy who wants to be Cobra Commander on the entire island chain, but unlike Cobra Commander, who couldn't be bothered to do anything other than sit at a table and bitch at Destro, this dude is pretty much everywhere. Seriously, he's everywhere. He's on the TV, then he's on a boat, then in a car, then he's home somewhere, then he's landing in helicopters, back on TV. The only person who has this much fluidity with their travel plans on the island is actually Danny. So it's only right that you're the one tasked with taking him out. And while you can pick to be the male or female, whichever version you go with, Danny should just be having "You're the Best Around" be playing as his theme song wherever he goes, because you are a badass. And wherever you go, you're shooting it up in this overall plot that has to do with the bad guy wanting to bring power to the island, poison coffee beans, and raise mutant dogs. And yes, all those are actually in the story. It's not just revolution, it's the wonkiness in between Far Cry games deliver. Quickly recognized as probably one of the few people on the island who can shoot straight, the Resistance, most of them at least, takes an instant liking to you, involving you in plans, execution, strategies at the highest level. That means you're quickly donning the mantle of leader as you clear out bases, search through locations to find more clues as to how to take out the main bad guy and more. Each of the main island sections is broken off into territories, most of them ruled by friends who need to be coaxed into joining you, as well as a general level that you should probably be to take them on. Now, the variety of missions here in Far Cry is bog standard, at least at first, a mixture of various games in the past and all their quests sort of smashed into one. Saving bases, saving people so they'll join you, buying upgrades to your various outposts and hideouts that offer all manner of gear and bonuses for you and the others around you. There's even a sort of a mini mission game here where you send out leaders who you've recruited as well as spare fighters to take on jobs and then walk them through a mini choose-your-own adventure as they go about it, which we've seen in some MMOs. As you go further and further into the game and level up, the enemies do in prior places as well, which actually makes sense because you'd think if a two-legged murder vehicle came out of the mountains once a month to bloodbath the entire government, someone would think of buying a bulletproof vest occasionally, and they do here. It never makes those older locations impossible, but it does make it so that you don't have that odd feeling of collapsing on an older spot and mulching 50 soldiers like it's nothing, only to quick travel and suddenly some dude in just jeans can swallow down 4 shots with a shotgun without staggering. Luckily, the game still has good control, with Danny able to wingsuit and parachute and jump jet, emergency land, helo out, run away, drive into pretty much every confrontation or experience. Each is reminiscent in all ways of the prior Far Cry games, with a follow this path AI driving system that also allows for you to do shootouts while rip snorting through someone's ripe coca field. Weaponry is the name of the game here for you. From your Supremo, think of it like various jetpacks assorted and assembled from questionable items you found around the game world, each with a special item and ability, usually a secondary skill as well. One might allow for you to jump jet forward quickly in battle, while at the same time, its special just straight up squirts out the entire contents of the pack's fuel onto the ground, ignites it, throwing all the enemies into the sky, or at the very least, running around on fire. Another might allow for you to shoot poison into enemies and cause them to attack one another. And this is going to be the hit and miss for Far Cry 6 right here, because there's a difference between the other Far Cries that Far Cry 6 has, and that's ammo. It's not just the environmental stuff that we've seen before, like Poison Arrow, which this game also has. It's that it has a variety of ammo, and some enemies are specifically vulnerable to it. For example, armor piercing for the heavies, soft jacketed for those without extra protection. The problem is, it sort of fucking sucks. I get the idea, but the only problem is in the midst of battle, remembering which weapon was the right one for a particular armor seems a bit delicate. Add this to the special enemies that you can find when you're tagging spots and bases. If he has a name, by the way, he's sort of a special, harder than the rest enemy. Or they may have a particular class like a healer or otherwise that can turn the tide if you don't take them out, because they're going to run up to some dude and heal him up that you've tagged in the beanbag from like 1,000 yards away with your flame-tipped 9mm Beretta, but by the time you get in there, you may not have the exact right bullet type you need. Again, you can kill them with any kind of bullets, it just may take longer, and it's a messier dive into the inventory than I would have liked. And the return isn't really excellent reflected here in the gameplay. Despite that, I actually enjoyed how the silencers would heat up, as I talked about in audio, and slowly failed as you fired, and you have to wait for them to cool off before they started working again, and how, for the better or worse, that would make you take a little bit longer and decide exactly how many shots you had before going loud or figuring out another way around it. And while there are silent weapons, of course, like the bow and arrow, sometimes they don't have enough punch to get through an enemy's helmet or kill them prior to them maybe setting off the alarm. And when they do, it is a damned disaster. And not only can you get unique weapons that can't be upgraded, but the normal ones can be upgraded, so can the Supremos and the cars. They can have different mod spots for each one, not only for various ammo types in the weapons like explosive and soft, hard, incendiary, in other words, but also paint jobs you can find around locations. You can get scopes and suppressors, like I mentioned prior. Equipment is separated between pants and shoes, gloves, coats, and headgear, each that offers various unique takes on upgraded bonuses that can be matched and set if you get all the pieces, with some upgrades offering and fostering better defense, while others really give you these unique abilities like running faster after killing an enemy, or a pair of gloves I found that actually stopped you from being on fire if you wore them. They were flame retardant, which was a huge bonus in some events. Of course, when you go out there, like prior games, healing is done by hurting yourself more. A self-harm nightmare. You may burn a cigar into a bullet hole or grab your fingers and just yank them back into straightness. Far Cry is never less than brutal. And speaking of brutal, do you know why there's no such thing as a stealth alligator? Because the world would never be the same afterwards. Alligators' versions of stealth is probably just pretending to be other animals so they can sneak into zoos and eat people. You get roosters and dogs and alligators and a couple secret ones, nowhere near as many as you got with Far Cry Primal. But be aware, some of these guys go apeshit if you don't control them. But it's not just the animals that you have to team up with. Danny's not the only one who can see the posh circumstances of leadership and financial shields that look strangely like humans as being corruption beyond and above. And the land of Yar is actually filled with people who want to join you, or at least help you out. You can even bribe some bad guys to get behind the scenes information about the illicit empire of evil that you're fighting. But that does bring up the issue that the Far Cry series have always had, and that's the AI. As you're moving through the locations, you're clearing out bases, you're saving hostages and hitting the X button like 150 billion trillion times to pick up stuff. The game will sometimes spawn informants wherever it thinks is cool. So sometimes you're there rolling around on fire from a mortar, and you hear another dude trying to sell you a map who's also rolling around on fire. I like the maps. They actually help. I think everyone does. There's not an official map-hating convention, but seriously, couldn't you guys have waited just a moment until I wasn't on fire? But at the same time, reverse that completely 180 when it comes to the AI for the world itself. You leap into a car, guess what? Enemies don't notice you and sense you from 8,000 miles away like Far Cry 5. In fact, if you holster your gun, you can walk right past a good deal of the enemies. And unless you're in a trespassing zone or you fly into a zone you haven't taken the anti-aircraft missiles out, the flexibility and the sandbox feel and reward that goes with that is so much higher. But what is surprisingly not higher here is the level of anarchy. I think half the time sequels are just living off the stored fat of the past game's nostalgia. Far Cry 6 has made two distinct improvements for me. One, without any caveats, the other bringing its own issues. The first is there is far less random anarchy. It does happens more when you engage and go out and try to take on enemies, but trying to fish in a stream and being attacked every 20 seconds by honey badgers in Far Cry 5 is replaced by encounters at least a bit more stretched out. And I would have to say, at times, Far Cry 6 felt a bit empty. And I think the developers understood that because they have added in horses, something for whatever reason Far Cry 5 and Montana didn't have. Far Cry 6 is added, and while not perfect, and let's be honest, no one's going to argue the best vehicle in the game is of course the motorbike and the sidecar, still, the ability to jump on a horse and really take it pretty much throughout the entirety of the game is very cool. There's even some missions on it. However, as we roll this into fun factor, that is one issue people are going to bring up. I saw a horse light on fire. Last thing I hear is a shrieking, four-legged, burning, crying abomination of a horse running over a hill away from me. Nightmare over, but there is some animal stuff in this game I'll talk about in the fun factor section that you should be prepared for. Because Far Cry is, if anything, a bit bipolar. It vacillates between vast stretches of dire prose, horrible consequences, only to finish off with a 3-quest trip with a pissed-off rooster with Dragon's Dogma AI as he proceeds to beat the shit out of literally every merchant on the island, like he has a vendetta against pottery because it reminds him of crockpots or something. Just as you get done seeing somebody get murdered in a cutscene, you strap a couch to the front of a car and mow down a bunch of enemies at a fort. Want to lob some poison grenades into that same group? Sure. Want to light a random horse on fire and then scare it into the fields where enemies are holding prisoners to light them all on fire? Can do, and I actually did. And you can do it in multiplayer, not only co-op, but also the mission system we've seen in prior games where there's a couple unique locations you can be jetted off to. Speaking of jetting off, if you want to jet off with a little bit of your cash, micros are in the game. You can apparently get a lot of different things in the store. What I have noticed is that the curve for what you get versus the time you spend in the game and the expectations there, it feels just like a single-player game. That can change in the future, just like a game can have no store and then suddenly have one, or have a store and be removed, though it's far less likely. And I'll keep track of those as this continues. I really do have to say, Far Cry 6 continued to offer little snippets and gameplay changes farther along than I was expecting, without really unduly punishing the player. For instance, there's no skill trees in this game. Those are effectively gone, with Far Cry 6 replacing those with the armor customization and bonuses, as well as the weapon customizations, not including the ammo situation, which is sort of on the side. The customizations themselves for those weapons aren't directly connected to the ammo. Also, you can kill an enemy, even a higher level enemy, most of the time with a headshot. You do have to get somewhat close because a lot of those enemies will have more armor, but this results in a Far Cry game that, surprisingly enough, feels almost like you have character classes in them, especially when you start adding in things like the Supremos, weapons, and customization. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. Also, yes, the game does have chicken street fighting in it, with two roosters shoryuken each other in the face, and while they are shown to be alive at the end, I can see that bothering someone. We're born into, we experience or pick the offenses that we're going to fight against. However, if you got that far, you got through some maimings, burnings, poisoning, someone with a 6-foot piece of steel shoved through their head, and about 100 other versions of self-torture. If you pick that hill to fight on, realize it's just one in a mountain range you climbed over to get to it. My rating for this is almost a buy, but it's still a wait for a sale. There's a couple reasons why. I did have a blast playing this, but the performance is not up to snuff. And I think if your performance is even worse than mine, which it probably is because most people don't even have a 1080 Ti, let alone a 2080 Ti. Also, the AI, while improved in some places, is not improved in others. And I can't wait to see a patch on this. And I wish the AI really took a major step forward. We've seen it in some other titles, and I would like to see it here. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, check out Patreon, check out Facebook, check out Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. Make sure to give it a thumbs up. Peace out. Stay tuned for more videos from me. I hope you have a good week.